There comes a moment, usually somewhere in the 50s, when you notice something subtle but unmistakable. You recover from things a little more slowly than you used to. A cold lingers an extra day. A busy week leaves you feeling drained in a way that would have barely registered a decade earlier. It is easy to dismiss these small signals as simply part of getting older. But what if they are not inevitable? What if they are messages from a system within you that is trying to tell you something important about how well it is being supported? There is a quiet conversation happening inside your body every moment of every day. And the lead participants are cells you have probably never heard of. They are called natural killer cells, and their activity may determine more about how you age than almost anything else within your control. What follows is not another list of supplements or a rigid program to follow. It is something far more valuable, an understanding of what your immune system actually needs from you, and why the simplest daily choices may be the most powerful ones you ever make. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The unseen architecture of health. How small daily choices shape the decades ahead. There is a question that arrives quietly, often in the middle of the night or during a quiet morning with a cup of tea. It is not a dramatic question. It does not arrive with urgency or fear. It simply appears. How will I feel 10 years from now? 20 years? Will I still recognize myself in how I move? How I think? How I engage with the world? This question is not about avoiding death. It is about something far more practical and far more immediate. It is about the quality of the years that remain. And beneath this question lies a deeper curiosity that few people put into words. What actually determines how we age? Not the surface answers about genes or luck or medical advances, but the real, day-to-day architecture of how human bodies and minds either thrive or simply survive as the decades pass. For most of human history, this question was answered by circumstance. People aged the way their parents aged, ate what was available, moved as survival demanded, and had little reason to think deeply about the long-term consequences of their daily patterns. But the modern world has changed this equation entirely. For the first time in human existence, the average person has more control over how they age than any external force. The challenge is not access to information. The challenge is something more subtle, distinguishing between what actually matters and what simply sounds impressive in headlines. The science of longevity has matured considerably in recent decades. It has moved away from seeking a single magic bullet, one drug, one supplement, one intervention that would extend life, and towards something far more interesting. Researchers now understand that aging is not a single process, but a collection of interconnected changes that occur across multiple systems simultaneously. The immune system changes. The metabolic system changes. The way cells communicate changes. The way tissues repair themselves changes. These changes do not happen in isolation. They influence each other, accelerate each other, and sometimes protect against each other. This interconnectedness is actually good news. It means that small adjustments in daily life do not target just one aspect of aging. They ripple through the entire system. A walk in the morning sunlight does not just improve vitamin D status. It influences sleep, mood, metabolism, and immune function simultaneously. A pattern of eating that avoids sharp spikes in blood sugar does not just benefit the pancreas. It affects inflammation, energy levels, cognitive clarity, and the health of blood vessels. The body responds to patterns, not prescriptions. What follows is an exploration of these patterns. Not a list of rules to follow or a program to complete, but a way of thinking about health that has emerged from decades of observation, research, and the quiet wisdom of populations who have aged well across generations. The ideas are simple, but simplicity should not be confused with ease. The simplest things, consistent movement, adequate sleep, meaningful connection, are often the hardest to maintain in a world designed to distract and accelerate. But they are also the most reliable. The biology of gradual change. To understand how daily choices shape the decades. It helps to understand what is actually happening inside the body during the process of aging. This is not about memorizing cellular pathways or genetic mechanisms. It is about developing a mental model of how the body works, so that the reasons behind certain recommendations become obvious rather than arbitrary. Consider first the immune system. It is common to think of immunity as something that either works or does not work, like a light switch. But the reality is far more nuanced. The immune system is not a single entity. It is a collection of different cell types, communication molecules, and organs that work together in a carefully coordinated dance. And like any complex system, it changes with time and use. One of the most well-documented changes with age involves a small organ called the thymus, located behind the breastbone. The thymus is where certain immune cells called T cells mature and learn to distinguish between friend and foe. During childhood and young adulthood, the thymus is highly active. But around age 18, it begins a slow, steady decline. By the time a person reaches 70, the thymus has shrunk considerably and produces far fewer new T cells than it once did. This sounds like bad news, and in some ways it is. The decline in new T cell production is one reason older adults do not respond as robustly to vaccines as younger people do. It is also one reason certain infections can be more severe in later decades. But the immune system is not passive in the face of this decline. It adapts. Other immune cells become more important, taking on responsibilities that the declining T cell population can no longer handle as effectively. Among these compensatory cells are natural killer cells. Unlike T cells, which need to learn to recognize specific threats, natural killer cells are part of the innate immune system. They do not require prior exposure to a pathogen to become active. They patrol the body constantly, looking for cells that are infected with viruses or have become cancerous. When they find such cells, they eliminate them. They also release signaling molecules that alert other parts of the immune system, helping to coordinate a broader response. The behavior of natural killer cells changes with age as well, but the pattern is different from T cells. In healthy individuals, natural killer cell activity can be well preserved even into later decades. In some cases, the number of natural killer cells actually increases with age, as if the body is trying to compensate for the loss of other immune functions. This compensatory increase makes the health of natural killer cells particularly important for older adults. When natural killer cell function declines prematurely, the immune system loses one of its most important backup systems. What determines whether natural killer cells maintain their function or decline? This is where the research becomes actionable. Studies that have measured natural killer cell activity in large populations have identified several factors that are consistently associated with better function. Two of the most consistently observed factors are vitamin D status and physical activity patterns. Neither is a magic bullet, but both appear to create an environment in which natural killer cells can continue doing their work effectively, even as other parts of the immune system change with age. The relationship between vitamin D and immune function is particularly interesting because it illustrates a broader principle about how the body works. Vitamin D is often discussed as if it were just another nutrient, like calcium or iron. But it functions more like a hormone, influencing the activity of hundreds of genes and affecting multiple systems throughout the body. Immune cells, including natural killer cells, have receptors for vitamin D. When vitamin D binds to these receptors, it influences how the cells mature, how they divide, and how they respond to threats. This does not mean that taking large amounts of vitamin D will supercharge the immune system. The relationship follows a pattern that researchers call a U-shaped curve. Very low levels are clearly associated with poorer immune function. Very high levels may also be problematic. The optimal range appears to be somewhere in the middle, where the body has enough vitamin D to support normal immune function without the potential downsides of excess. This middle range, often cited as between 40 and 60 nanograms per milliliter in blood tests, is the range associated with the lowest risk of poorly functioning natural killer cells in the population studied. Physical activity shows a similar pattern. In the research on natural killer cells, people who engaged in regular moderate exercise were less likely to have very low natural killer cell activity than people who were sedentary. But the relationship was not linear. People who exercised at very high levels, daily intense training, for example, sometimes showed lower natural killer cell activity than those who exercised moderately. The optimal pattern appeared to be exercise 2 to 4 days per week, at an intensity that was challenging but sustainable. These patterns matter because they point to something fundamental about how the body responds to interventions. More is not always better. The body evolved in environments where scarcity was more common than excess, and it often responds to extremes by downregulating rather than enhancing function. The goal is not to maximize any single variable, but to maintain a range of variables within the zones where the body functions best. The vitamin D question. Vitamin D deserves deeper attention, not because it is more important than other factors, but because it is widely misunderstood. The public conversation about vitamin D has swung between extremes. At one point, it was ignored entirely. Then it became a miracle nutrient that could prevent everything from fractures to cancer. The reality, as is so often the case, lies somewhere in between. Vitamin D is unique among vitamins because the body can produce it internally, given sufficient exposure to ultraviolet B light from the sun. When sunlight strikes the skin, a cholesterol derivative is converted into a precursor form of vitamin D, which then undergoes further transformations in the liver and kidneys to become the active hormone that cells throughout the body can use. This production system is elegant and ancient, reflecting the fact that humans evolved under conditions of regular sun exposure. The challenge in the modern world is that many people do not receive enough sun exposure to maintain optimal vitamin D levels. This is not simply a matter of lifestyle choices. Latitude plays a major role. For people living in northern regions, the angle of the sun during winter months means that even prolonged time outdoors may not produce significant vitamin D. Cloud cover, air pollution, and time spent indoors further reduce exposure. Cultural practices that emphasize covering the skin also affect vitamin D synthesis. When sun exposure is insufficient, the body must rely on dietary sources or supplements. But vitamin D is not abundant in most foods. Fatty fish, egg yolks, and liver contain some, but it is difficult to obtain adequate amounts from diet alone. This is why many countries have adopted policies of fortifying certain foods with vitamin D, and why supplementation is common in populations at risk of deficiency. The question of what constitutes optimal vitamin D levels has been debated extensively. The levels required to prevent rickets, the classic deficiency disease, are quite low. But preventing rickets is a very low bar. Researchers interested in immune function, bone health, muscle strength, and other outcomes have generally concluded that higher levels are beneficial, up to a point. The range of 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter that emerged from the natural killer cell research is consistent with findings from studies on bone density, fall prevention, and other age-relevant outcomes. Achieving and maintaining levels in this range requires attention to several factors. For people who live in sunny climates and spend time outdoors with some skin exposed, sun exposure alone may be sufficient during certain seasons. The amount of exposure needed varies based on skin pigmentation, age, and other factors. But for many fair-skinned individuals, 10 to 30 minutes of midday sun on arms and legs several times per week can support vitamin D production. For people in northern latitudes, during winter months, or for those who cannot safely spend time in the sun, supplementation becomes more relevant. The appropriate dose varies widely between individuals. Factors that influence vitamin D requirements include body weight, baseline levels, age, and genetics. This is why testing can be useful. A blood test provides information about where levels currently stand, and repeat testing after several months of supplementation shows whether the chosen dose is moving levels in the desired direction. It is worth noting that vitamin D is fat-soluble, meaning it is stored in body fat rather than excreted in urine like water-soluble vitamins. This storage capacity means that levels do not need to be topped up daily. It also means that extremely high doses taken over long periods can accumulate to potentially harmful levels. The goal is maintenance within a range, not the highest possible number. Movement as medicine. The relationship between physical activity and health is so well established that it risks becoming background noise. Everyone knows exercise is good for them. Yet knowing and doing are different things, and the gap between them widens as life becomes more complicated. For people in their 50s and beyond, the question is not whether to exercise, but how to think about movement in a way that makes it sustainable rather than another obligation. The research on natural killer cells and exercise provides a useful lens through which to view physical activity. The findings were specific. Moderate exercise, performed 2 to 4 days per week, was associated with better natural killer cell function. But the deeper insight is about the nature of the relationship between stress and adaptation. Exercise is a form of stress. It challenges the body, and the body responds by becoming stronger and more resilient. But the relationship between stress and adaptation is not linear. Too little stress produces no adaptation. Too much stress produces breakdown rather than growth. This principle applies to all forms of exercise, from walking to weight training. The body needs sufficient challenge to stimulate adaptation, but it also needs sufficient recovery to consolidate those adaptations. The optimal point varies between individuals based on their current fitness, age, and recovery capacity. For someone who has been sedentary for years, a 10-minute walk may be sufficient stress to stimulate positive changes. For someone who has exercised consistently for decades, more intense or prolonged activity may be needed to continue progressing. The type of exercise matters less than the consistency. Walking, swimming, cycling, strength training, yoga, tai chi, all have demonstrated benefits for various aspects of health. The best exercise for any individual is the one they will actually do, consistently, over years and decades. This may seem obvious, but it is often overlooked in discussions that focus on which type of exercise is optimal. Optimal means nothing if it is not sustained. For older adults, certain types of exercise deserve special attention because they address specific vulnerabilities that emerge with age. Strength training, for example, helps maintain muscle mass and bone density, both of which tend to decline without regular stimulation. Balance training reduces the risk of falls, which become more consequential with age. Flexibility work maintains range of motion and reduces stiffness. Aerobic exercise supports cardiovascular health and metabolic function. A complete approach to movement includes elements from each category, adapted to individual capabilities and preferences. The outdoor component of exercise deserves mention as well. In the research linking exercise to vitamin D levels, the correlation was partly explained by the fact that people who exercised more tended to spend more time outdoors. Outdoor exercise combines the benefits of physical activity with sun exposure for vitamin D synthesis, and with exposure to natural light that helps regulate circadian rhythms. The circadian system, which governs sleep-wake cycles and many other bodily processes, is sensitive to light exposure. Morning light in particular helps synchronize the internal clock, leading to better sleep and more stable mood. None of this requires elaborate equipment or memberships. A daily walk outdoors, at a pace that is brisk enough to feel like effort but sustainable enough to maintain for 30 minutes, provides a remarkable range of benefits. It supports cardiovascular function, maintains joint mobility, exposes skin to sunlight, regulates circadian rhythms, and provides a mental break from the constant stimulation of indoor environments. It is simple, but simplicity should not be mistaken for lack of power. The weight factor, body weight, is a sensitive topic, and discussions of weight and health often generate more heat than light. But the research linking obesity to viral load and immune function is too consistent to ignore, and it points to something important about how the metabolic state of the body influences its ability to respond to threats. The study that found higher viral loads in overweight individuals was not an outlier. It confirmed what other research had suggested, that excess body fat, particularly in certain patterns, creates a physiological environment that compromises immune function. This is not about appearance or social judgments. It is about the biology of adipose tissue, which is not inert storage but an active endocrine organ that produces signaling molecules affecting the entire body. Adipose tissue, especially visceral fat, the fat stored deep in the abdomen around the organs, produces inflammatory molecules. These molecules circulate throughout the body and contribute to a state of low-grade chronic inflammation. This inflammation is not the acute, localized inflammation of an infected wound or a sprained ankle. It is systemic and persistent, a constant background hum of immune activation that taxes the system over time. The problem with chronic inflammation in the context of immune function is that it consumes bandwidth. The immune system is designed to respond to acute threats by mounting a rapid, intense response and then returning to a resting state. When it is constantly activated at a low level by signals from adipose tissue, it loses some of its capacity to mount a robust response when a genuine threat appears. This is the exhaustion phenomenon observed in the natural killer cell research and elsewhere. The relationship between weight and viral load follows from this understanding. When a virus enters the body, the initial immune response determines how rapidly the virus is controlled. A robust early response keeps viral replication in check. A sluggish response allows the virus to replicate to higher levels, increasing the severity of the infection and the likelihood of transmission to others. If the immune system is already partially occupied by the chronic inflammation associated with excess weight, it may not respond as quickly or as vigorously as it should. This does not mean that everyone who carries extra weight will have poor outcomes from infections. The relationship is probabilistic, not deterministic. Many individuals with higher body weights have robust immune systems and recover from infections without complications. But across large populations, the pattern is clear enough to warrant attention. Weight management, achieved through sustainable changes in eating and activity patterns, is one component of maintaining immune competence. The challenge with weight management is that the modern food environment is designed to defeat it. Highly processed foods, engineered to be palatable and convenient, provide abundant calories with few of the nutrients the body needs. Portion sizes have increased. Eating has become disconnected from hunger, driven instead by availability, habit, and emotional cues. In this environment, maintaining a healthy weight requires conscious effort that was not necessary for most of human history. Sustainable approaches to weight management focus on patterns rather than rules. They emphasize whole foods, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, lean proteins, while reducing the frequency and quantity of ultra-processed options. They pay attention to hunger and fullness cues, eating when genuinely hungry and stopping when comfortably satisfied. They recognize that consistency matters more than perfection, and that the goal is not rapid weight loss, but gradual, sustained change that can be maintained for life. The interplay of factors. One of the most useful ways to think about health is to recognize that the factors discussed so far do not operate in isolation. They interact, amplify each other, and sometimes compensate for each other's shortcomings. Understanding these interactions makes it easier to see why comprehensive approaches to health are more effective than isolated interventions. Consider the relationship between vitamin D and physical activity. The South Korean research found that people who exercised more tended to have higher vitamin D levels. This correlation could reflect several mechanisms. People who exercise may spend more time outdoors, increasing their sun exposure. People who are health conscious in one domain may be health conscious in others. So exercisers may also be more likely to take supplements or eat vitamin D-rich foods. And physical activity itself may affect vitamin D metabolism, though this is less clearly established. Whatever the mechanisms, the practical implication is that these factors cluster. Someone who establishes a habit of daily outdoor walks is simultaneously addressing physical activity, vitamin D status, circadian rhythm regulation, and stress reduction. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts because the parts support each other. The walk feels good, so it is easier to maintain. The sunlight improves mood, making the walk more pleasant. The improved sleep that follows from better circadian regulation makes the next day's walk feel more achievable. The same principle applies to weight management. Regular physical activity supports weight maintenance by expending calories and, more importantly, by improving metabolic health. Better metabolic health reduces the chronic inflammation that impairs immune function. Improved immune function supports overall vitality, making physical activity feel more rewarding. The cycle reinforces itself in a positive direction. Conversely, when these factors move in the wrong direction, they can reinforce each other negatively. Sedentary behavior leads to weight gain and reduced time outdoors. Weight gain increases inflammation and may lower vitamin D levels, as vitamin D is sequestered in adipose tissue. Lower vitamin D and higher inflammation impair immune function. Reduced immune function may lead to more frequent illnesses, further reducing physical activity. The cycle spirals downward. Recognizing these patterns is not meant to induce guilt or anxiety. It is meant to illustrate that small changes, consistently applied, can shift the direction of the cycle. The goal is not perfection, but trajectory. Moving from sedentary to occasionally active, from rarely outdoors to weekly walks, from highly processed foods to more whole foods. Each shift in the right direction changes the dynamics of the entire system. The aging immune system in context. The immune system does not age in a vacuum. It ages in the context of a whole person, with all the complexity that entails. Stress, sleep, social connection, and sense of purpose all influence immune function through pathways that researchers are only beginning to understand. Chronic psychological stress has well-documented effects on immunity. Stress hormones, particularly cortisol, influence the distribution and activity of immune cells. Under conditions of chronic stress, certain aspects of immune function are suppressed while others become dysregulated. The pattern is similar in some ways to the immune exhaustion seen with chronic inflammation. The system is activated but not functioning optimally. Sleep is another critical factor. During sleep, the body performs maintenance functions that are difficult to accomplish while awake. The immune system is no exception. Certain immune cells increase their activity during sleep, and the production of signaling molecules follows a circadian rhythm that depends on regular sleep-wake cycles. Chronic sleep restriction impairs vaccine responses and increases susceptibility to infections. Social connection may seem unrelated to immunity, but the data are surprisingly robust. People with strong social networks tend to have better immune function than socially isolated individuals, even when other factors are accounted for. The mechanisms are not fully understood, but likely involve stress reduction, behavioral factors, and direct effects of social bonding hormones on immune cells. Sense of purpose. The feeling that one's life has meaning and direction has also been linked to better health outcomes, including immune function. People who report a strong sense of purpose tend to engage in more health-promoting behaviors and may have different physiological responses to stress. The effect sizes are not enormous, but they are consistent across studies. These factors matter because they are modifiable. Social connections can be cultivated. Sleep habits can be improved. Purpose can be discovered or created at any age. They are not separate from the physical factors discussed earlier, but intertwined with them. A person who walks outdoors regularly is more likely to encounter neighbors and friends, supporting social connection. The improved sleep that follows from regular activity and morning light exposure creates a virtuous cycle. The sense of competence that comes from maintaining physical function supports a sense of purpose. Historical and population observations. Looking across human history and across different populations provides useful perspective on what normal human aging looks like. For most of human existence, people lived in environments that required regular physical activity, provided abundant sun exposure, and offered foods that were minimally processed. Chronic diseases that dominate modern medicine, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, were rare, though infectious diseases and accidents were common. This does not mean that people in the past lived in a state of perfect health. Life was hard, and many died young from causes that are now preventable. But for those who survived to older ages, the patterns of aging often look different from what is common today. Muscle mass was better preserved because physical labor was required throughout life. Bone density was higher because of weight-bearing activity and sun exposure. Metabolic health was better because sugar and refined grains were scarce. Modern populations that maintain traditional lifestyles show similar patterns. The Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer groups, spend their days walking long distances, climbing trees for honey, and digging for tubers. They have no chronic diseases of the sort that fill hospitals in industrialized nations. Their immune systems face constant challenges from parasites and pathogens. Yet they handle these challenges without the chronic inflammation that plagues modern populations. These observations are not prescriptions to abandon modern life. The advantages of modernity, reliable food supply, sanitation, medical care, comfort, are real and valuable. But they come with trade-offs. The same comforts that reduce physical demands also reduce the stimuli that keep bodies robust. The same food abundance that prevents starvation also promotes overconsumption. The challenge is to retain the benefits of modernity while finding ways to provide the body with the signals it needs to function well. Practical integration. The information presented so far is useful only to the extent that it can be integrated into daily life. Integration does not mean adding more tasks to an already full schedule. It means shifting existing activities in directions that support long-term health and recognizing opportunities that are already present. Consider meals. Every meal is an opportunity to support or undermine metabolic health. Choosing foods that are close to their natural state, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, fish, lean meats, provides nutrients that support all body systems. Preparing meals at home, when possible, gives control over ingredients and portions. Eating slowly and without distraction allows the body's natural fullness signals to register before overeating occurs. Consider movement. Every day contains opportunities to move that are easy to overlook. Taking stairs instead of elevators. Parking farther from entrances. Walking while talking on the phone. Gardening. Housework. These small movements accumulate and contribute to overall activity levels. They are not substitutes for dedicated exercise, but they complement it and make the overall activity pattern more robust. Consider time outdoors. The average person in industrialized countries spends more than 90% of their time indoors. This is a dramatic departure from human evolutionary history. Making a habit of spending time outside each day, even briefly, provides light exposure for circadian regulation, potential sun exposure for vitamin D, and the psychological benefits of nature. A morning walk serves multiple purposes simultaneously. Consider social connections. Maintaining relationships requires effort, but the effort pays dividends across multiple domains of health. Regular contact with friends and family, participation in group activities, and engagement with community all contribute to the social fabric that supports well-being. For older adults, maintaining social connections becomes increasingly important as other sources of structure and meaning may diminish. Consider sleep. Sleep is not passive time, but active maintenance. Prioritizing sufficient sleep, maintaining consistent sleep and wake times, and creating an environment conducive to sleep all support the restorative processes that occur during the night. Good sleep makes everything else easier. Exercise feels more achievable. Food choices are wiser. Mood is more stable. None of these considerations requires perfection. The goal is not to execute every day flawlessly, but to shift the average trajectory in a positive direction. A day with a short walk, a reasonably healthy meal, a few minutes outside, a pleasant conversation, and adequate sleep is a good day. Many such days, accumulated over years and decades, create the conditions for healthy aging. The question of measurement. How does one know whether these efforts are working? The desire for feedback is natural, and the modern world offers many ways to measure health. Blood tests, fitness trackers, scales, and other tools provide data that can be informative. But measurement can also become its own trap, creating anxiety about numbers that fluctuate for reasons unrelated to genuine health. A balanced approach to measurement focuses on trends rather than single data points. A blood test showing vitamin D levels in a desirable range is useful information. A single high reading on a blood pressure monitor is less useful than the average of many readings over time. Daily weight fluctuations mean little. Weight trends over months mean more. Some of the most important indicators are not measured by any device. How does it feel to climb stairs, to carry groceries, to get up from a low chair, to walk a mile? These functional measures reflect the integration of multiple body systems and provide feedback that is directly relevant to quality of life. Improved function is a clear signal that efforts are paying off. Other important indicators are even more subjective. Energy level, mood, mental clarity, quality of sleep. These are difficult to quantify, but easy to notice. When they improve, something is working. When they decline, something needs attention. The value of measurement is not in the numbers themselves, but in what they reveal about the relationship between actions and outcomes. Seeing a positive change in a measured parameter can reinforce beneficial habits. Noticing that a particular pattern of eating or exercising leads to better sleep or more energy provides motivation to continue. The goal is not to achieve perfect numbers, but to develop a sense of what works for one's own body. The limits of control. A discussion of health strategies would be incomplete without acknowledging the limits of personal control. Genetics play a role in how people age. Accidents happen. Some diseases arrive regardless of how well one has lived. The idea that perfect adherence to health recommendations guarantees a long and healthy life is a fantasy, and a potentially harmful one because it leads to self-blame when things go wrong. The appropriate frame is not control but influence. Daily choices influence the probabilities. They shift the odds in favor of better outcomes. They do not determine outcomes with certainty. A person who exercises regularly, eats well, maintains social connections, and gets adequate sleep is still vulnerable to illness and injury. But their baseline resilience is higher, and their capacity to recover from setbacks is greater. This distinction matters because it affects how people respond to the inevitable challenges of aging. If health strategies are seen as a contract, I do X, and the universe guarantees Y, then every setback becomes a failure. If health strategies are seen as an investment in resilience, I do X to improve my chances and increase my capacity, then setbacks are simply part of life, to be met with whatever resources have been accumulated. The research on natural killer cells illustrates this principle. People with better vitamin D status and regular exercise patterns are less likely to have very low natural killer cell activity. They are not guaranteed to have high activity. The relationship is probabilistic, not deterministic. But probability matters when the stakes are high. Shifting the odds in one's favor, even modestly, is a reasonable goal. A broader view of longevity. Discussions of longevity often focus on lifespan, the total number of years lived. But for most people, the more relevant measure is health span, the number of years lived in good health, with preserved function and quality of life. Adding years at the end of life that are characterized by disability and suffering is not a victory. Extending the period of vigorous, engaged living is. The factors that support health span overlap substantially with those that support immune function. Regular physical activity maintains muscle mass and cardiovascular capacity. Good nutrition provides the building blocks for tissue maintenance. Adequate sleep supports repair processes. Social connection and purpose provide reasons to remain engaged with life. These are not separate goals but facets of the same underlying project, creating conditions in which the body and mind can continue functioning well for as long as possible. The research on natural killer cells fits into this broader view. Natural killer cells are not the whole story of immune function, but they are an important part. Their activity is influenced by factors that are themselves beneficial for other aspects of health. Vitamin D supports bones and muscles in addition to immune cells. Exercise supports cardiovascular and metabolic health in addition to immunity. Weight management reduces mechanical stress on joints in addition to reducing inflammation. The strategies that support natural killer cell function are the same strategies that support overall health. This convergence is reassuring. It means that efforts do not need to be scattered in a dozen different directions. The same daily practices that support one aspect of health tend to support others. A person who develops the habit of daily outdoor walks is not just supporting their immune system. They are supporting their cardiovascular system, their musculoskeletal system, their circadian rhythms, their mood, and their social connections if they walk with others. The return on investment is multiplied. The question of starting point. For people in their 50s or beyond who have not been particularly attentive to health in earlier decades, the question often arises, is it too late? The answer from research is clear. It is never too late to benefit from positive changes. Studies of older adults who begin exercise programs show improvements in strength, balance, and cardiovascular function. Studies of dietary changes show improvements in metabolic markers. Studies of smoking cessation show reductions in risk even among those who quit in later decades. The body retains remarkable capacity for adaptation throughout life. The improvements may not be as rapid or as dramatic as they would be in a younger person, but they are real and meaningful. A 70-year-old who begins a walking program will not develop the cardiovascular capacity of a 20-year-old athlete, but they will improve their own function relative to where they started. That improvement translates into better quality of life and reduced risk of adverse outcomes. The principle applies across all the domains discussed. Vitamin D levels can be increased at any age through supplementation or sun exposure. Physical activity can be initiated at any age, with appropriate modifications for individual capabilities. Dietary patterns can be shifted at any age. Social connections can be cultivated at any age. Purpose can be discovered at any age. The potential for positive change does not disappear with time. This is not to minimize the challenges of making changes later in life. Habits are deeply ingrained. Physical limitations may require adaptations. Social environments may not be supportive. But the research consistently shows that change is possible and beneficial, regardless of starting point. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. The same logic applies to health practices. The role of medical care. Medical care has a place in this framework, but it is a specific place. Modern medicine excels at acute interventions, repairing fractures, treating infections, managing medical emergencies. It is less effective at the gradual work of maintaining health and preventing decline. This is not a criticism of medicine, but a recognition of its proper domain. Preventive care, regular checkups, appropriate screenings, management of known risk factors, complements the lifestyle strategies discussed here. A person who exercises regularly and eats well still benefits from blood pressure monitoring, cholesterol checks, and cancer screenings. These medical interventions catch problems early, when they are most treatable. They are not substitutes for lifestyle, but additions to it. The relationship between lifestyle and medical care is synergistic. Good lifestyle practices reduce the burden on the medical system and make medical interventions more effective when they are needed. A person who maintains good cardiovascular health through exercise and diet is a better candidate for surgery if it becomes necessary. A person with well-controlled blood pressure through lifestyle and medication has lower risk of complications from any medical procedure. The goal is not to avoid medical care entirely, but to use it appropriately while maintaining the foundation of health through daily practices. Medicine handles the acute and the exceptional. Lifestyle handles the chronic and the continuous. Both are needed, and they work best when they work together. The quiet path. There is a certain kind of health content that promises dramatic transformations. Lose 20 pounds in a month. Reverse aging with this one supplement. Boost your immune system overnight. This content is popular because it appeals to the desire for quick fixes and easy answers. But it does not reflect how human bodies actually work. The path to healthy aging is quieter. It consists of thousands of small decisions, repeated over years and decades. A walk today, a vegetable at dinner, an early bedtime, a phone call to a friend. None of these decisions is dramatic. None produces immediate, visible results, but accumulated over time. They shape the trajectory of aging in ways that are profound. This quiet path has the advantage of being sustainable. Dramatic interventions are hard to maintain. Extreme diets, intense exercise programs, complicated supplement regimens, they require constant effort and attention, and they are abandoned as soon as motivation flags. The quiet path asks for less at any given moment, but asks for it consistently. A daily walk is easier to maintain than a weekly marathon. Cooking simple meals at home is easier than following a complicated diet plan. These practices become part of the fabric of life rather than additions to it. The research on natural killer cells and immune function points toward this quiet path. The factors associated with better function, adequate vitamin D, regular moderate exercise, Healthy weight are not exotic. They are the same factors that have been associated with better health across multiple domains for decades. There is no new secret, no breakthrough discovery that changes everything. There is only the gradual accumulation of evidence supporting what thoughtful observers have long suspected, that how we live matters more than any single intervention. For people in their 50s and beyond, this is both challenging and liberating. It is challenging because it places responsibility where it cannot be outsourced, on daily choices rather than medical fixes. It is liberating because it means that small, sustainable changes are genuinely valuable. There is no need for perfection, no requirement to follow an impossible regimen. The goal is simply to shift the average, day by day, in a direction that supports long-term health. The body has remarkable capacity for resilience when given what it needs. It does not need perfection. It needs patterns, consistent patterns of movement, nourishment, rest, and connection that allow its innate repair systems to function. The research on natural killer cells is one small window into how these patterns operate at the cellular level. But the principles apply broadly across all the systems that determine how we age. The question that arrives in quiet moments, how will I feel 10 years from now, cannot be answered with certainty. But it can be influenced. The choices made today, and tomorrow, and the day after, accumulate into the reality of future years. Not through magic or miracle, but through the ordinary physiology of a body responding to its environment. The body is always listening, always adapting, always responding. The question is what it hears. The body is always listening. It pays attention to every walk, every meal, every night of rest, every moment of connection. And it responds not with dramatic announcements, but with gradual shifts in capacity and resilience. The single most important truth to carry forward is this: how you live shapes how you age, not through magic or miracle, but through the ordinary physiology of a system designed to repair and maintain itself when given what it needs. If this conversation has sparked a thought or a question, we would be honored to hear it in the comments. And if you would like to continue exploring the archive, we invite you to browse the other films here in the Longevity Library and to subscribe so that new wisdom finds its way to you when it arrives. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.